1 in 3 is intended for mature audiences. Episodes contain explicit content and may be triggering as they often include violence and other varying forms of abuse such as emotional, psychological, sexual, and physical. In most cases, names have been changed to protect all involved. Please note, statements and opinions of guests do not necessarily reflect those of my own. Hi, warriors. Welcome to 1 in 3. I'm your host, Ingrid. If there's one thing we've learned over the years, it's this: never underestimate the resilience of a survivor. Today's guest embodies that resilience. She not only survived years of abuse that began at the young age of 8, but also faced her abuser in court, enduring the pain of being re-victimized before bravely sharing her story with the world in her memoir, Carpenter Road, Sentenced to Silence. She didn't stop there either. Her prequel, Carpenter Road, The Inadmissible Years, was recently released as well. Her mission is clear and powerful: to ensure victims, specifically children, are seen, heard, protected, and empowered to prevent abuse before it happens. It's my honor to introduce you to Morgan. Hi, Morgan. Thank you for joining me.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So before we get into our conversation, could you give a bit of a background just so we can get to know you a little bit?
Oh, absolutely. Let's see, my background in my professional life has been caregiving for the elderly, especially with dementia and Alzheimer's. And I worked in that field for a very long time and did private caregiving for a long time. And then unfortunately, my health went south due to the abuse, and I haven't been able to work since then. I'm still undergoing a lot of procedures and so forth. But all that time I was loving to write. I was writing my story. I was mainly doing it for myself, but then I thought, maybe this could help others. Maybe this could help survivors, especially when I added in the trial. I thought, wow, this could really be beneficial for people to see what it's like to go through a trial. And I just kept forging ahead with my memoir and decided to actually publish it. And that has gone very well. I live in the Midwest with all of my furry friends and animals and family, and just kind of lead a quiet life and have a ball. And I graduated from Western Michigan University back in 2005 with a master's in gerontology, which is significant because I wasn't able to read until I was in my mid-20s beyond a fourth grade level, because once my abuse started, my education stopped. And so that was quite an accomplishment for myself.
And your abuse is, you detail it in your book that you were referring to as Carpenter Road, Sentenced to Silence.
Right.
And that chronicles the abuse, but not the beginning of the abuse, correct? Starting at?
Yeah. Yes, correct. That is, and I did that intentionally. I started Carpenter Road, Sentenced to Silence at the age of 14 when I'm entering high school. And I did that because somebody asked me, what was the very first time you tried to wave the white flag to get help, to get out of the situation? Because until then, I was absolutely terrified to even consider telling anyone anything. And so I left a note under my teacher's door, and I did not sign it. And I wrote it anonymously and sent her that I needed help. And that is where the book starts, is basically my leaving that note under the door. And then it kind of follows me through high school and still trying to get out of the situation. And then ultimately I reported the abuse and a trial ensued. And so Carpenter Road, Sentenced to Silence, goes back and forth between my time of dealing with everything and the court transcripts. So you actually get to read the entire trial throughout the book.
And from what I understand, I did read the book, is that you didn't even go into full detail of the level of abuse that you suffered.
Yes, that is correct, because uh, mainly because I wanted to follow what happened with the trial, and plus the time frame of the book. At the very beginning, I'm still enmeshed in the abuse, but for like another 8 months. And then it's all about me trying to get get my feet under me and try to have some sense of life and try to deal with what happened to me, and then ultimately trying to help the children that were still left behind in that house get out from under it. And so when I started it at the age of 14, I was almost out of the abuse. So I left out so much. And the other reason I did that was because the trial itself, due to statute of limitations, would only permit me to talk about abuse that happened from mid-age 12 until it ended. I wasn't able to even talk about or discuss the abuse prior to that at the trial. And I also wasn't allowed to speak about what he did to other family members in the house, because they were so reluctant to speak up and tell or testify or even admit what had happened. They were silent. And so nothing could come into the trial except for, you know, certain instances after the age of 12, either physical or sexual. And so I left out 80% of what happened in the house out of the first book. And then I had a lot of people ask me, why would you go back over there? That wasn't your house. It wasn't my family. I wasn't related. Why would you go back over there? And I was a little stunned by the question, but yet it was valid, because why would a child intentionally go over to their friend's house knowing what was going to happen? And I thought, we have to be more educated in trauma and in the grooming process and what happens to children when they get caught up in these situations. And so instead of, explaining that or explaining myself to others, I decided to write a prequel, and I started it at the beginning of the abuse, and it then ultimately meets up with Carpenter Road Set into Silence. And so I divulge absolutely everything that happened to me, and it is quite the bombshell. And both are very, very important and critical to read, because the first one, I think, is really helpful for survivors to read, because you're on this journey of emotional battling, trying to overcome what you went through and survive that. And then this next one is more slanted towards anyone working with children, because you actually see and feel, as I write this from a child's perspective, what it was like to go through such a traumatic experience for that many years, and what that did to me emotionally, physically, spiritually, sexually, everything. And so the two together, I think, are a really good sounding board for people to understand what trauma does to children.
Well, and I like how you wrote Carpenter Road, how it would go from, I mean, not present day today, but present day, where you were in the courtroom, and then flashing back to what was going on a few years prior to that. It's really heartbreaking to understand, one, that a child was being abused, but two, that you started it at 14, and that's much later. That's years after the abuse even began. And there are a lot of factors that play into almost this like perfect storm for you to be the victim. And one of those things, am I wrong? It's like a generational trauma.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. In the second book, the prequel, I talk about my family a little bit more, because so many people were like, how did your parents not see this? How did they not understand what was happening? How did teachers miss this? But in my instance, my mother was abused by her father. He was drafted into World War II unexpectedly. He was thinking he was headed off to Western Michigan University with a basketball scholarship. And the next thing, he is dragged onto a plane going to Okinawa at 18 and having no clue what's going on, and came home 4 years later so destroyed by World War II, and not having met my mom until then, because my grandma was pregnant when he left. He didn't bond with her, and he treated her horribly. He was also dealing with his trauma by drinking and tormenting my mom, and he really signaled her out because I think he just didn't bond with her. And so then he ultimately started sexually abusing her. And at 18, my mom left the house and met my dad, and then they got married. But she did not deal with her trauma. She did not ever seek help or anything. She drank. And so, like you said, the perfect storm. I've got a mother who is drinking way too much. She's drinking outside of the house. She's never home. My father's working endlessly. And here I am just kind of floating along by myself and, experiencing some neglect and some abuse at home. And then I meet a family who has a mom who never leaves the home, but that was for a different reason. 6 kids, food on the table, dinner every night. It wasn't very much, but it was more than what I was going to find at my house. And so I just, boom, got caught up. But, you kind of link it back to my mom's drinking and why that happened, and why her father was abusive coming off of a war like that. It was just like a snowball going downhill, and a perfect storm for me being set up into that situation.
Well, and then it would be almost understandable if you continued that yourself, if you just continued into that cycle, because you've been so traumatized for years, and you still, if you hadn't taken the steps maybe to legally seek action, you could have potentially continued in this snowball effect. But you did have a few advocates for you finally show up in high school, and those helped. I always love thinking of people who are on this path, and it just takes one person to bump them and change the entire trajectory of their lives, and hopefully in a better way. And I feel like it came late for you. I think there were probably quite a few opportunities that could have come up prior to you leaving a note under your teacher's door at the age of 14. And with, I think, those adults who finally did advocate for you and look out for you, and then along with your own personal strive to survive, you already survived the physical trauma, but now to survive the psychological trauma and recover from that, that's a huge undertaking.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is. I mean, I advocate for us, every survivor, to take that journey, because ultimately it leads us back to being as whole as we possibly can. It'll interrupt that cycle of generational trauma. But we owe it to ourselves to heal and not be silenced. And so I really advocate for taking the journey, even though it is grueling and painful and very difficult to recover from, because that type of abuse, the sexual abuse of a child, is just destroys you. And it's very hard to come back from, but your alternative is much worse. So I'm a big proponent of get into therapy, get into counseling, whatever that looks like for you, but do the work so you can heal that, if not, for yourself, but for the rest of your family. Because, people sometimes have that thinking that, well, if she's abused, she's going to abuse, the next person down the line. That's not always the case in the same way, but you can spread your toxicity from your trauma in other ways. It could be at work, it could be at home, it could be wherever, but somehow, some way, if you haven't dealt with that trauma, it's going to seep into your life and onto others in some form or fashion. And we've seen that for years and years. I mean, we've watched it, unfold with people that we've known that have been abused, whether it's in our own family or in the community. I mean, you can see it happening you can tell when someone hasn't dealt with their trauma.
Oh, for sure. And so Carpenter Road takes us through your journey of therapy and dealing with your trauma, and while still having the legitimate fear of safety for yourself. And it really showcases your strength because you eventually don't stop there at just healing yourself. You feel this obligation to look into legal action because you did understand that there were still younger children in the home. And it takes us then through the psychological trauma then of the re-victimization of the court system. So do you want to talk a little bit about the whole legal system and that process and how difficult, this is a light way to say it, difficult to maneuver through?
Yes, I hope and pray that it's different today than what I experienced, but I haven't really paid a huge amount of attention to what that's like for survivors now. And I know a lot of laws have changed since my trial in 92. So that some things have improved for victims and survivors. But I would say that the judicial system is still set up to protect the perpetrator, not the victim. I mean, no matter what the crime is, that is the case. And so I wish we could kind of take a look at that and say, you know what? Let's take care of the victim. And the people that are doing the perpetrating maybe shouldn't have quite as many rights as we think, because in my case, just being put into the same courtroom with him was extremely traumatizing. I could barely function. I could barely mentally operate. I was expected to sit on a stand less than 10 feet from him. And then at one point, they expected me to draw the layout of the house 5 feet from him. My legs were shaking so bad I could hardly stand up. No one took into account how horrific it was for me to be sitting in front of him, describing all of these details about what he did to me sexually in front of a courtroom of people. And, I know they allow smaller children to testify via video, but I really think even if you're an adult and you're, a survivor, you should be able to do that too, because that almost made me physically sick and vomit every day I was there, knowing what I was walking into.
Well, even your own legal representation, and I know that she was trying to help you win your case, and but even she would sometimes, she didn't understand actually some of the interactions that you had with her. It was almost like a lecturing for not doing what you're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, it was shocking. The first time she screamed at me, I just, my mind completely shut down. I was not expecting it, but I understood it later. I was being very evasive, and I was reluctant to talk. My parents at that time were sitting in the courtroom, and she was asking me questions about, the neglect and alcoholism in the house. And my parents are sitting there, and I'm, well, yeah, that was kind of hard. And it wasn't very good. And I mean, it's like pulling teeth. And then after that, she didn't allow them in the courtroom. But I was just being evasive and reluctant to talk, that she was going to lose moving forward. And she took me in the hallway and screamed at me a couple times. And then the other times during the trial, when they pulled me back in for a rebuttal testimony, I had just woken up. I had been sleeping in another room, and she started showing me pictures of the basement, and my brain was just going all over the place, because I'm now looking at pictures of where I was abused. And then they throw me on the stand and start, arguing about semantics. There were no locks on the doors. What are you talking about? And you're lying. You weren't locked in a closet because there's no locks on the doors. And I couldn't even come up with a rational reasoning of trying to explain that if he put you in there, you would be an absolute idiot to open that door and walk out on your own because he's going to beat the daylights out of you. And so if he put you in there, you were locked in the closet. I'm sorry that I used the word lock when there were no locks on the doors, but that's how it was. But the whole time my brain was just trying to, pull this information. But the minute you start yelling at me or challenging me or calling me a liar or all these things that went on during the trial, survivors' brains just start, going haywire. And so the whole trial itself was extremely traumatizing, but I would never change it for a minute. I am so, so grateful that I walked that journey because, spoiler alert, he was convicted. And it was a tough conviction to sell because it's almost 8 years later. And, it was basically my testimony and others that testified in my behalf versus him and his people testifying. It was like, who do you believe? And that's what won her the trial was, why would this individual come in here, make these claims, go through an entire trial? She's like, was this fun for you? No, ma'am, this was not fun for me. I'm not here because I'm bored. And so she kind of, in her closing argument, explained that to the jury as to who had more to lose, who was facing a bigger fallout. And so, the jury saw through all of the manipulation and lies from his testimony and really how sincere I was, and the fact that why would I be sitting here explaining all this if it didn't happen.
Well, right. Plus your actual physical reaction to some of the questioning. And that's one thing that's so frustrating about the judicial system is the lack of trauma-informed individuals who are working there to understand what is happening to the victim. I mean, if you go to therapy and you have a therapist who's in a room with it's just the two of you and you are talking about, if we're going back to this memory, you have a way to keep yourself grounded to know where you are presently. But in the courtroom, they're asking you, I want you to go back to that basement and I want you to detail everything while he's sitting right there. And then to not have any understanding of why you wouldn't be able to think clearly and why you would be freaking out.
Yes, I agree. It was really, really tough. And that is not the best approach at all for survivors. And I was even asked to speak to a college health and human services about trauma-informed healthcare. I mean, not to go down another different rabbit hole, but that in itself also is very difficult for people who have been abused to navigate the health system and to deal with what that brings. And so both of those everything needs to be looked at in terms of trauma-informed for when, we have women, men, children who are that traumatized. And then you're expecting them to kind of perform normally, and it just doesn't work out that way in many instances. Going to the grocery store can be, triggering for me. Going into any kind of crowds or anything. I mean, sounds, smells are very often triggering to me when I'm out in public, and I keep myself very secure and closed in because I eliminate triggers that way. And so just going to the dentist, I mean, I cancel my appointments more times than I actually show up because it's so hard for me to get there and be in that type of position. It's horrible. I mean, my hands are gripping the chairs the whole time. I'm almost hyperventilating and I'm just like, just get it done and get it done. And so there's a lot of things that we don't think about when people are abused at that level of how they deal with just very basic day-to-day life.
Right. And even outside of the courtroom, there's not very much support in general for survivors. Just the day to day, a lot of individuals could look at a survivor and question, like how you were mentioning, why would you keep going back over to that house instead of holding the perpetrator accountable for why would you abuse a child? It's
Mhm.
why would a child go back to that house?
Right. Yes. Yeah, we always look at the victim first. I don't know how we've gotten there in society, but yeah, I mean, I never asked for any of that. I came upon it happenstance. I walked in on him abusing his daughter, and then bam, I'm pulled into it. Whether he was intending to pull me in before that or not, I have no clue. But I was pulled in before I even knew what was going on, and before I could even think of a way of getting myself out of it, it was already too late. I mean, he was threatening me. He was threatening. He was threatening in every possible conceivable way. And half the time they were contradicting and didn't even make sense. But I'm 8 years old and I have no clue what's going on. And so, it's we forget what an 8-year-old mind is doing. And so to an adult,
Yeah.
my returning to that house does seem insane. But again, you're not thinking from a 8-year-old's perspective.
Right. Well, and then even in victims of domestic violence as adults, the victim a lot of times will return back to their abuser, and there's a psychological connection that brings them back to it. And even despite just being questioned of why would you stay so long or why would you go back, there's always the questions too of like, well, did that really happen? That sounds awfully exaggerated. I mean, and I get it. As human beings, we don't want to believe that other human beings can do that to another person.
Right, right. Yeah, but you're right. The question should be, you know, why is your husband beating you? Let's look at that first before we ask her and question her or doubt her story. It's like, why does he think it's okay that he knocks you down because dinner was 10 minutes late?
Exactly. Exactly. We need to start turning our focus more on the perpetrators. So you mentioned a second book. Do you have a title of the second book?
Yes, it's still called Carpenter Road, but it's the Inadmissible Years because everything at trial, which is a legal term, was inadmissible. And so it is called Carpenter Road, The Inadmissible Years, and it does have a different cover than the first one. And so being that it's a prequel, I kept it very similar.
That makes sense. And so, like you discussed, that one goes into more of what happened when everything initiated. So the reader can understand the grooming process more. And it gives professionals who work with children an insight as to what clues to look for in children who may be getting abused at home. Is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. If you read it, you will probably be thinking to yourself, what, especially in my grade school, what are those teachers thinking? What are they doing? Why are they not helping her? I mean, I came in with I switched schools in third grade, and that's how I met the family. And so coming into this school, I'm coming in with very good academic records, attendance, and no behavioral issues at all. 8 months later, I'm barely passing any class. I'm absent more than I'm there, and I have horrendous behavioral issues within 8 months of stepping into that situation, into that school. And not one teacher tried to help me, tried to reach out, tried to ask me questions. I was visibly bruised and in pain quite often. None of that was addressed. And so that was a really unfortunate situation, and um, I, I give all credit to when I went into high school that those teachers intervened. It was really scary at first because I wasn't used to it, and I knew that it was going to cause some sort of um, exposure to what was happening, which was my biggest fear, which again is part of that whole grooming situation of what I'm thinking of being caught is like the worst in the world, even though I want out of this situation desperately. Getting caught was as worse as the abuse itself. And I give them all the credit for, helping me get out of the situation, making my family put me into therapy, early intervention for therapy. I wouldn't be where I am today had the teachers at that school stepped in. But my grooming process was violent. And I don't really, I don't know what the percentages are on grooming or abuse when it's done in a way that's, very methodic and almost kind at the beginning. They're paying special attention. They're giving them treats. They're focusing in on a talent that they might have. And they're kind of taking them along the process of ultimately when that line is crossed. And my situation, he was violent right from the beginning, but I would still say that there was a lot of grooming that took place because I didn't have a clue what he was doing. And I didn't understand for the longest time that he would ask me questions like, "Where have you been?" And, I didn't know if he meant 5 minutes ago or if he meant a week ago. I didn't understand what he was getting at. But what he was ultimately teaching me was that I better get my ass back over to that house as often as I can. And when I'm summoned by my friend, she was inviting me to play, but really what that meant was you need to come over. And it took me months to really comprehend that that's where he was going with this. That's what he was talking about. That's what he was intending me to do, was that if I had a free night, a free day, whatever, I was expected to be at their house. And he beat me multiple times over and over again for not getting that. And so I think my case was a little extreme and maybe not the normal grooming type of a process, but it still was there.
Did all 6 of his children attend the same school as you?
They did, yes.
Okay, and the teachers ignored the symptoms from all of you?
Yes. There were multiple occasions where one or many of us would have visible bruising or marks. There were multiple occasions where our behavior should have been like completely a red flag that I think there's something seriously wrong, especially when there was a collection of, at the school at any given time, there was probably at most 4 of them there at the same time because of the age spread out. But I know when I first started there was 4 of them. One of them was so cognitively delayed because of, I think, head trauma and being repeatedly held back. And then the oldest boy would break down in absolute hysterics for leaving his boots on the bus or leaving his boots at school because he knew when he got home he was going to be beaten for that. And so all of us, just shy of having a sign across our bodies that said, "We are being horribly abused, please help." Everything was right there. It was so obvious, and it's not obvious 30 years later. It was obvious then, but it was for some reason ignored. And I would like an explanation from the school on why that was. I did at 8th grade, my last 2 weeks in that school, we had an event because we were graduating, and I had a massive meltdown, and my teacher would not let me out of the room until I told her why I was so hysterical. And the only thing I could come up with to say was I was molested, which was so not what you would classify what was happening, but that's all I could muster out to say was I was molested. And it was like I never said it. She's legally obligated to report that. Nothing was done. And then I tried to talk to her about something else, like a couple weeks later, right before we were to graduate. And she barely looked at me. And when I said something to her, she just got a very odd look on her face and put her head back down, like I did not say a thing. And she wouldn't even address me anymore. And I just slunked out of the class. And yeah, that was my grade school experience.
That's horrific. I mean, talk about the opportunities where somebody could change a trajectory of your life. There were so many opportunities.
That was hard.
And then you said that you had a 4th grade level reading ability. Did they just continue to move you up despite that?
Yes, they sure did. I think for multiple reasons. One, it was a private school. So, my mom had a kind of a say in that, unlike in the public school systems, they say, no, you are not advancing. You're not advancing. In private schools, they can do what they want. And they just kept advancing me. I know one time my mom said, no, you're not holding her back, but that was very early on. And I wouldn't say I was in complete doomsday with my academics at that point, but she did say no, and they approached her another year, and then after that, they had no business advancing me. And I also believe they didn't want to hold me back because they didn't want me in their class again. I was horrible. I was a horrible, horrible child. Once this abuse started, my behavior was such a massive red flag because of the stuff I was doing. I mean, today you would look at a child behaving that way and be like, holy crap, who is abusing that child? You wouldn't say, is that child being abused? You would say, who is doing it? And I was an awful, awful student. And I think they just kind of kept pushing me because they didn't want to deal with me. They didn't want me to repeat. And as a private school, they were, able to do that. And by the time I was in 7th grade, the teachers didn't even give me textbooks. They didn't even assign me the textbooks. They knew damn well I could not read them. And so I was just allowed to sit in the back of the classroom. If I kept myself under control, I could sit in the back of the classroom and just do basically whatever I wanted, because they washed their hands of me at that point by the 7th grade. No textbooks at all.
That's awful.
Mm-hmm.
No, the high school you went to is a different high school than the family did. Is that right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes, I continued on to the kind of like the next step within the private school system. I went to the private high school, and his family went to the community public school.
In your first Carpenter Road, his daughter comes to take the stand on his behalf. And at that time, I think you mentioned that she was still living at home with him. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you have any idea what's happened to any of the family members since then?
I do. And I in the epilogue of my prequel, I'd go into what happened to them, but it's a mixed bag. The one that I spoke about, who was cognitively delayed due to head trauma, has passed at 45, and not really sure how or why. And then my friend did her best. She never obviously dealt with her trauma at all. I think she's got it so segregated in her mind that I don't even think she is aware of it at times, but she didn't seek any help or anything. She tried to do a military route, but was ultimately honorably discharged, but due to mental health reasons, they basically asked her to leave. And then when her own father was released from prison after 20 years, she had a complete massive mental breakdown and unleashed her trauma on everyone around her to the point where it became a huge problem, to the point where everyone around her was questioning what was going on and could not understand why some switch had flipped in her mind and she was losing her marbles. And they hired a private detective because she was unleashing such toxicity within the school system, within their neighborhood, within her friends group. They're all just looking around going, what in the hell is going on? And they hired somebody to figure it out, and they backtracked it and found the trial, found her father, found me, and asked if I would be willing to speak to them about what possibly could have set her off. And I said, okay. They released him, and then they ultimately put him in the state she was living. I think some distance was there, but put him back in her state, which again, that is explained in the first Carpenter Road because there was a horrible trauma that occurred after he went into prison at the household. And the mom took the rest of the children that were left and moved out of state. So then when he was released from prison, they put him down in the same state as the rest of them, and it did not go well at all. But she has, I would consider her dangerous at this point, which makes me a little bit nervous releasing this next book. But yeah, she has, I would say, very closely mimicked a lot of behaviors that she grew up with, and it's very terrifying.
And I suppose there's no legal way for anyone to keep you updated on tabs of where she is or what she's doing?
I have an inside person that is that no longer leaves the house because of it. So frightened, so terrified, so traumatized by what my friend unleashed. She won't. So I do stay loosely in connection with one of them just to kind of keep tabs on what's going on. But yeah, it was a really bad situation. I have a file about 3 inches thick of everything that she did. And she's so skilled and a master manipulator that the authorities didn't know who to believe. They didn't, and also because the whole situation was so insane as to what she was doing and what these people were reporting was happening. The officers, and even at the school, they're like, they couldn't wrap their head around it. They didn't have the full picture. They didn't have the whole story. And so they couldn't wrap their head around who was telling the truth. And she is so skilled and so conniving and just probably one of the best actresses I've ever seen on this earth. She had everyone just tossing their hands in the air going, what? We don't know who to believe. We don't know what to think. We don't know what this is. And so again, there's another perfect example of someone who didn't deal with what happened to them, and now she's unleashed it all on everyone around her.
Yeah, and I always say there's a ripple effect of any form of abuse, especially when you're talking about childhood trauma, because it just continues on. Even when you heal your trauma, there's just so many opportunities for other people to feel the effects of it, even if it's not direct effect. But oh my gosh, this is like a huge example of that.
Yes, absolutely. It really is, even more so than my mom. I mean, what she's done, and I don't feel comfortable going into that because, like I said, they're still dangerous. And even though we're separated by many states, she's very unpredictable.
Now, your abuser, was it? I don't know if I'm remembering this correctly. He was not allowed to live in the same county as you?
Right. That was a condition of his parole to me, that he would not be released back into my community. However, at the last minute, they went back on that. And then I put up a absolute huge fit and involved the media because we had quit jobs. We had sold our house. We were moving back to where I grew up, where it happened, only because I felt safer in my hometown, in my community, my family, my friends, all my people that supported me during the trial. I mean, I knew everyone because it's a small town, and I felt safer being back in this community if he was going to be out. And then they said, well, we don't have anywhere to put him. No one will take him. We don't know what to do. We're going to have to put him back in your county. And I said, the hell you are. And I went nuts and was like, no. And I got everyone involved back in when you could, barely internet days, and involve the media. And they put so much pressure on Department of Corrections that they all of a sudden found another solution. But it was to put him out of state, back where his family had fled to because of what happened after the trial. They fled the county, and now they're getting a knock on their door, and they're like, guess what? We're putting him here with you guys. And I don't think they had a choice in the matter. I don't know a lot of details on that, but yeah, that was a mess even upon his release. It was a mess, and I got so screwed over in that situation too.
I mean, this is just another perfect example of taking care of the perpetrator more than the victim.
Yes, it sure was. Yeah. And they told me someone of his caliber would not be released back into society. And I'm like, oh, thank God. And then all of a sudden, nope, we've got overcrowding prisons. So here he comes. Welcome him back into society. And he did not follow the conditions of his parole as you should have. And everyone refused to deal with it and lock him back up because, why would we want to go to the trouble of dealing with that again and then start paying for him to be incarcerated? But he put in a visitation request to my friend, and he's not allowed to be around children. He's not allowed to be near schools, nothing. And on the form, are there any children in the house? No. There was a 10-year-old daughter. To me, that's a violation of his parole to try to seek visitation with his daughter, who has a 10-year-old in the home who he's not allowed to be around, and then lie about it on the form. And yet nothing happened. His parole should have been revoked.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you said placing him somewhere, did he get placed into a home, like some kind of home-based parole sort of situation?
He was placed back with family in South Carolina.
Like in their home?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes, and I don't know.
Why can't he just go? Why can't they just put him somewhere else? Like, why does he have to be in their home?
I don't know. I was not involved in all of that, and that is like, people don't maybe totally understand that once you become incarcerated, you become basically property of Department of Corrections, and Department of Corrections operates very differently and siloed from like the rest of the judicial system, where the prosecuting attorneys deal with it, where you're sentenced, where you're tried, all of that. Once Department of Correction takes over, they make the decisions and they do what they want. And that is where, everything went wrong upon his release. First of all, they released him, and they shouldn't have. And second of all, he already had one situation where his daughter was basically kidnapped and raped by his cellmate that had been released, and they refused to connect the dots on that. That was not a coincidence. That was not happenstance. That was to prove a point. So they ignored that. Then they released him, which was another mistake. Under the conditions, they would not put him back where I was, and they went back on that. And then they forced family in another state to take him, I don't know how that, transpired. But ultimately, his son that passed away at 45 was in the home with him. And I can only imagine what that was like, and do not have a cause of death on that young man. But nonetheless, being back in that home with him had to be horrific. And yeah, the Department of Corrections they just do what they want, and they do not, absolutely, unequivocally, do not take the survivors into account at all. They could care less. It's bottom line dollar. Get this man out, save us this money, and we don't care where he goes or what he does again. And no one's really looking at holding, Department of Corrections accountable for some of these people that they're releasing back into society, or even the judges.
My God. And let's either put him back in the county of the woman who put him in prison or his family. Either way, he's abused everyone.
Everyone. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it's like I sit back and I think, God, I wish I was this intelligent and gifted to make this all up, because, I mean, you can't make this shit up. It's insane. The stuff that happened at the trial, after the trial, 20 years later, 30 years later, it's still happening within this family unit. And it is completely insane. I mean, I tell the story and I think, good Lord, I can't even hardly believe it myself sometimes, that what's all transpired over all of these years from the very beginning. It's just, I mean, people went missing, people died. I mean, people, of somebody that testified for me and witnessing him abusing his children, ultimately they found a way to turn him in for, farmers sometimes say they may have planted this many acres and yielded this much acreage, and those numbers don't always match up. And then the government kind of helps them with that. Well, they knew somebody who knew somebody, and the next thing you know, one of the witnesses from the trial is going to jail when they all do it.
Okay, so now we can seek justice.
Yeah. I mean, and then one of the witnesses disappeared. I mean, like no one could find him. And the stuff that happened during that whole entire time is just, and it makes you understand why I'm so paranoid and fearful of, everything around me, because I watched all of this unfold right down to where his cellmate was released and came back to his house and did that to the 14-year-old daughter. I mean, it's just scary stuff.
Well, yeah, and this part reinforces the fact of a child being afraid of repercussions for telling. So, that child keeps going back to the house because the consequences of not going back to the house are too severe and too scary to fathom. And it's come to fruition. Like, he has come through on threats and with people missing and his daughter being attacked from his former cellmate.
Yes. Everyone that testified on his behalf, every one of them said he is a man of his word, which was a hilarity, because that's what we were saying during the entire courtroom drama was, he is a man of his word. If he gave you a threat, it was not idle. It would be carried out. And he did that throughout his entire life with his friends, his family, his children. And he was really always considered, very volatile and dangerous. And, if you crossed him, you were going to learn the hard way, because he was a man of his word.
My goodness. Okay. Morgan, is there anything you think that we did not touch on? My mind is reeling. I don't know that I can think straight. I have to leave this up to you.
I know. It's like a 10-episode Netflix series. It's so insane. It just,
seriously,
it's so deep and goes so far back and is so deep. It's really hard to wrap your head around in such a short time, because so much happened to me, to his family, and then all of the fallout afterwards. But no, I don't know what else we can touch on other than I really would like to address maybe um, how and what we're doing to help children um, see the red flags of grooming, because
Yes.
we did that whole bad touch, good touch for a long time, and that was a huge disservice because once you're touched, it's too late. So why are we teaching kids? You know they're being groomed leading up to the point where then the line is crossed. So why are we not backing up and teaching about what grooming looks like in all scenarios to children? And 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 also, I'm not in the school system that much, and I don't, I don't know much about what is taught and not being taught, but it seems like we've kind of gotten away from dealing with abuse and having those after school special seminars at school that say, hey, you know, this is what to watch out for. This is what you need to report. This is, this is what you do. And that we seem to have gotten away from that. But I would really like us to bring back, some educational services for the children about grooming. What does grooming look? What is grooming? What does it look like? Who might be the culprit? Who might be the targeted individual? Um, and then go over all scenarios of what grooming can look like amongst different types of populations, and really help children, because children are extremely intelligent, very perceptive, they miss very little, and so we can very easily teach them when someone starts singling you out. Maybe talk to your parent about that. But we're just kind of like, I don't know, we've just dropped the whole topic and are not helping kids understand what happens when a pedophile zeroes in on you. What does that look like from the very first interaction? And I would love to bring that back into our culture and say, hey, this is what it looks like. This is what you need to do. And at all costs, make sure you inform somebody. Uh, that would be, I would really like to see that happening.
I agree with you. I think that, we're in a society where, we talk about a lot of things, but we also don't like to talk about a lot of things. So things that make us uncomfortable, like pedophiles, the fact that children are abused by people that they are familiar with, that is not just a stranger all the time who sweeps them away and abuses them. And it's very uncomfortable to think about. It's uncomfortable to think about teenage violence or domestic violence, all of these topics that people don't want to talk about, or they'll hear a little snippet and say like, okay, yeah, I hear what you're saying. Let's move on to something else. It's uncomfortable for everyone. But if we don't talk about the things that are uncomfortable, then nothing gets changed. Everybody's able to continue to sweep these topics under the rug. So yeah, I completely agree with you. I think we need to talk more, especially to children. That's where a lot of this starts at.
Right. And the fallout is on our children when we don't talk about these topics and when we're not discussing them. And it's devastating, because the reality is stranger abduction or stranger molestation or rape is quite rare. But that's all we see on Datelines and ABC 2020 and, Netflix documentary series, are these instances where an unknown individual kidnaps or hurts a child. But those are really rare. And most children are abused by somebody they know. And it started with a very very basic grooming process, and then just starts to kind of escalate from there. And if we can intervene with children and educating them about what that looks like, I think we could make a huge difference for kids.
And I mean, I'm so grateful that somebody did intervene with you when you were 14 and you started to find all these advocates. But it's also just so heartbreaking to hear of the intervention coming late, and I agree with you that these interventions, let's start the interventions before something happens. Instead of being reactive and cleaning up whatever trauma has occurred, let's do something to stop it from happening in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I think we're the most reactive society on this planet. We don't learn from our mistakes. We don't make the necessary changes. We're very reactionary. It's really frustrating and sad because so many things could be prevented. I cannot wrap my head around why we're not doing it. I mean, and you can't even say it's money because what it costs society to have all of us either on disability or in rehab or whatever is way more costly than if we were putting preventative measures in place. It would cost a lot less to do that. And I just can't understand for the life of me why, as a society, we choose not to go that route. I wish somebody could explain it to me because I have no clue.
Same. Same. Okay, so Morgan, how do people get your books?
Well, I published it through Amazon, and through Amazon you can order it in hardcover and paperback and and I finally did I released it in an Audible. It is a AI generated read, but it's not too bad. But you're also allowed to find it on Nook, through Barnes and Noble websites. You can order it, Apple, pretty much everywhere. But to actually purchase a physical copy, it's probably easiest to go to Amazon. I have a lot of local bookstores that carry it, but globally, Amazon would be your best bet. But I recommend reading Carpenter Road Set in Silence first, and then read the second one as it was intended. But they're standalone; you don't have to. But you get the full story when you read both of them, no matter which order. But you'll get the whole picture.
Okay, and the second book again is Carpenter Road.
The Inadmissible.
Admissible. Okay.
Inadmissible. It's a legal term, and it is a mouthful. But that is why I was not allowed to talk about 80% of what happened to me. It was inadmissible, and I was like, "Are you guys crazy?" I mean, the whole story, revolved around my needing to disclose what happened to everyone in the household, because otherwise it really didn't make sense. I mean, I'm sure the jury was sitting there going, what in the hell is going on? Because, nothing was allowed to be talked about. And so I titled it The Inadmissible Years.
Okay, perfect. And before we close, do you have any parting words of encouragement or just an important message to take away?
I saw somewhere a phrase that I've kind of adopted because I loved it, but shame must change sides.
I love that.
Yeah, I did too. And it's not mine, and I saw it and I quote unquote borrowed it, but shame must change sides. And the shame victims feel, or survivors, however you want to say that, is so astronomical that it's suffocating. The shame is just absolutely suffocating to us as survivors. And it must change sides because we don't own it. We didn't put it upon us. We didn't ask for it. But yet, that's what keeps the statistics so high, is the shame people feel from being abused, that they either don't talk about it, don't report it, pretend it never happened. In my friend's case, I mean, she doesn't even acknowledge she was abused, even 30 years later. And the shame and stigma that is placed upon us from the minute we're touched does not belong to us. And survivors need to let that go and put that back onto the perpetrator, because it belongs to the perpetrator who thought it was okay to cross that line and then damage us forever. But I have to say to survivors, it doesn't belong to us. Go ahead and send it right back over to the perpetrator. It's not ours. And I really, really encourage others to try to do the best they can to heal in whatever way possible, because we owe that to ourselves. We deserve that. We deserve to be whole and shame-free and feel that we are lovable, because we are. And those are just messages that the perpetrator puts upon us in order to keep us in line. And it doesn't belong to us. It needs to go back to the other side.
I agree. And that's such a powerful message. Thank you so much, Morgan, for your time and your books and your message and coming on here today.
Oh, you're absolutely welcome. And I thank you for listening and having me. And I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you again, Morgan, for joining me today. And thank you, Warriors, for listening. I've included links to purchase Morgan's books, as well as her 1 in 3 profile in the show notes. I will be back next week with another episode for you. Until then, stay strong, and wherever you are in your journey, always remember, you are not alone.
Find more information, register as a guest, or leave a review by going to the website 1in3podcast.com. That's the number 1, IN, the number 3, podcast.com. Follow 1 in 3 on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at 1 in 3 podcast. To help me out, please remember to rate, review, and subscribe. 1 in 3 is a .5 Pinoy production. Music written and performed by Tim Crow.